Hola amigos y bienvenidos a mi canal. En el video de hoy quiero contarte por qué estoy aprendiendo español y por qué creo hacerlo es importante. También te daré alguna evidencia científica que sugiere que aprender un nuevo idioma es bueno para tu mente. Vámonos. Okay, so welcome to my channel, friends. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I want to learn Spanish and why I think it's important. And I'm also going to give you some scientific evidence that suggests that learning a new language is really good for your mind. So let's go. All right, so why learn a new language? After all, many native English speakers can barely use their language effectively, let alone to its fullest extent. So learning a second language seems like a completely unnecessary challenge, right? Well, that's sort of the point. After all, this entire channel is based on the premise of challenging yourself to develop new skills and ideas and capabilities that I didn't have before, and to inspire you and others to take that same journey to learn new things and to achieve goals and objectives that you never thought you could achieve, especially given your busy lives. So learning a new language is going to push me beyond the boundaries of what I know, and it's going to open up new ways of thinking and challenge me to use my mind in ways that I had not done before. On top of this, I'm really drawn to the idea of being able to experience the world through a new perspective, right? Or a new lens, if you will. So learning a language like Spanish is going to open up doors for me to consume content and read literature and communicate with 500 million people that I wasn't able to communicate with before. So this is a really, really interesting way to open up and expose myself to all new cultural ideas. Setting aside my personal reasons for wanting to learn a new language, there's a growing body of scientific evidence that suggests that bilingualism or multilingualism offer a number of cognitive health benefits. And I really didn't think that I would do this topic justice without talking about these. So even though I'm not a neuroscientist, I am going to discuss a few research papers that I found really interesting, and I'll provide the links to all of these in the description. The first paper I want to talk about is a 2015 study from Harvard University, which shows that for bilingual and multilingual speakers, as opposed to monolingualists, so people who only speak a single language, there is significantly more temporal lobe preservation and stability, as well as significantly more white matter, quantity of white matter in the frontal lobe. Again, like I said, I'm not a neuroscientist, but essentially what these things mean is that over time, the brain's health and structural integrity is maintained more for people who speak more than one language. And the white matter also points to these people having higher cognitive abilities in terms of controlling their attention, performing reasoning, and sort of flexible critical thinking tasks. This paper also points to a number of suggestions that bilingual or multilingualism helps to stave off the onset and effects of dementia, which is something that's really appealing, obviously, to anybody who's ever seen that manifest itself in someone that they know or love. So in a similar vein, a 2014 study from Northwestern University used fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, to perform studies on co-activation and inhibition in various speakers, right? So monolinguals and bilinguals or multilinguals, to study the amount of co-activation and inhibition. So what these terms mean is co-activation is when you have a thought or you have a question posed to you, both languages that you know, so let's say in my case, English and Spanish, are active at the same time. And you're sort of doing this judgment of like, which one is the appropriate language to use? How do I approach this answering this question or solving this problem. And then the inhibition is the ability to basically resolve that question of the co-activation. So which one is the right one to choose, and then making that choice and using the most effective language. So studying these is really important because it shows that bilingual and multilingual speakers have a higher ability to practically apply inhibition, which is, in other words, means that they are more effective at filtering out noise or distractions. I don't mean noise as in like audible noise, but like noise as in stuff that's not pertinent to the topic at hand. So they're much better at filtering out the sort of chaff and focusing in on the specific topic or concept that they need to put their attention on, something that's really important. So this is yet another indicator that learning more than one language can help boost your cognitive performance and your ability to focus on tasks and think through things really critically. Another paper that I found really interesting, although I didn't have full access to, so I don't have all the details on it, is this study from the University of Chicago, which suggested that for people who speak more than one language, being presented with ideas or having to think in their foreign language help to significantly reduce their cognitive or decision-making biases. So in the context of this discussion, a bias really represents like a deviation from like a normal or rational thought process. And so there are varying degrees of like psychological or cognitive biases. One sort of, like common example is like confirmation bias, right? So the confirmation bias concept is basically that people seek out and consume content that supports their preconceived notions or the ideas that they want to be true. So thinking in a foreign language or using your second tongue that you've learned helps to reduce those biases. And like I said, I don't have access to the full paper, but I can only assume that it's because you don't have the luxury of sort of immediately understanding the spoken language or what you're consuming. You have to sort of process that through the lens of your foreign language that you're trying to be able to speak before you can then actually think about the concept. So that keeps you constrained into a more rational way of thinking and doesn't allow you to go down these avenues of cognitive biases. The last paper I want to talk to you about is a 2005 study from Harvard University. And I realize that this one is a bit old now at this point. It's 16 years old, but I still think it's an interesting concept. And so this paper did a sort of representative study of college students and found that when they account for other factors like cognitive performance and the field of study and all of these different things that might be different and sort of leveled the playing field, students who spoke more than one language earned a pay premium of roughly 2 to 3%. So in other words, if you can speak more than one language, it is likely that you're going to make more money. This is obviously important to everybody, right? Money is a necessity in the world that we live in. Couldn't make a more obvious statement than that, but it's great to know that having a second language could potentially open up doors to not only new opportunities, but to also higher paying opportunities. So I hope this scientific review has given you some food for thought in terms of whether or not you should follow through with learning that new language. So whether it was maybe that you were going to learn Polish so you could speak to your grandparents, or like me, you want to learn how to speak Spanish so that you can communicate with your coworkers or your employees. I think the few papers that I just covered at a very high level show clear indicators that if you do that, not only are you going to open the door to be able to communicate with all sorts of new people and have all these different ideas, but you're going to improve the way that your brain works and its long-term health and stability, but you're also going to potentially open up new doors for your career or even new financial avenues. Entonces, ¿por qué aprender español? So why learn Spanish? The first reason is pretty practical. Spanish is the second largest language, or second most spoken in terms of native speakers, only behind Mandarin Chinese. So, it stands to reason that it would make sense to learn an extremely widely distributed language like Spanish, right? I mean, there's nearly 100 million more Spanish speakers globally than there are English in terms of native speakers. Now, you can start looking at the number of people who can speak some amount of English, and that's higher than the number of people who can speak some amount of Spanish. But in terms of fluent native speakers, it's quite a bit larger than English. And not only is Spanish the second most spoken language globally, it's also the second most spoken in the US. So in the latest data that I was able to find, there are around 41 million native speakers of Spanish in the US, and then there are another 12 or 13 bilingual Spanish speakers. So the native speaker population alone, that makes up around 13% of the US population, which is a non-trivial amount of the people that live in this country. And on top of that, Census Bureau data suggests that by 2050, the US, which is currently the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, will actually move ahead of Mexico and will have the most Spanish-speaking people in terms of just total number of speakers in the entire world. So it's already ahead of Spain. It's already ahead of all of the other, you think of large Spanish-speaking countries around the world and in South America in particular. US has more than everyone except for Mexico. So it's a really practical language to learn for somebody who is living and working in the US. And to that point about work and professional relationships, I work on a really regular basis with a number of people from Mexico, and for years I've watched them interact either written or verbally with the English language, right? These people have all learned how to speak a second language. And obviously it wasn't all for their job, but to effectively work in the industry that we're in, they have to be able to speak English to communicate with the people based in the US. And so it seems only appropriate that I extend the same sort of effort and energy to learn their language and be able to share ideas and thoughts with them and communicate in their native tongue, and extend that gesture of saying, look, I recognize how much work you have put in to be able to communicate with me in English. I'm willing to do the same to be able to speak to you in Spanish. And hopefully that will not only make it, enjoyable for me to have conversations with somebody in a different language, but it will also help build trust and relationships professionally that would have maybe been harder to establish had we only spoken in English. Now, the third reason is a little less practical and a little bit more of a personal vendetta. When I was in high school, I took a couple Spanish classes, actually 2 years of Spanish. I basically didn't pay attention at all, right? I just was a normal high schooler and just blew the class off and really didn't retain much. And I have since then tried on a few occasions to learn a bit of Spanish here and there, but I've always failed. And if there's one thing that you're going to learn about me, or that you maybe already know about me, I really hate failing. I love the outcomes of failure because it drives me to push myself to succeed, right? But I don't love the feeling of failure in the moment and the fact that I'm not competent at something. So this is like a personal journey for me to defeat that demon of not being able to learn Spanish in the past, and to be able to conquer this and say, look, now I can speak this new language and all of these other benefits come with it, but also I can sort of check off that box and say, look, I finally knocked this one out. Kind of selfish, but that's who I am. All right, so let's talk strategies. first off, I already made a video about this, so you're probably aware, but I'm using an app called DuoLingo, which is free to download and free to use. They do have a paid version, which gives you a few extra bells and whistles and allows you to skip ads. But in terms of just trying to learn a language, the free version is perfect, right? You can wait for like 10 seconds and then skip an ad, and it really doesn't impact you in any way. So I'm not going to go into a ton of depth about what DuoLingo is because I already did make a video about it, sort of walking you through what the interface looks like and how the lessons work, but I am using that as my sort of daily way of interacting with and practicing the language, right? So I have a Google task reminder that comes up at 5:45 in the morning and tells me, hey, spend 15 minutes practicing Spanish. And so in the mornings, and then if I get other opportunities throughout the day, I will sit down and work through lessons on DuoLingo and try to build up my vocabulary and practice the language. So I find that to be a really effective way of like incorporating that, this practice into your everyday life. The second tool that I'm using is podcasts, and these are free, right? I mean, everybody knows what podcasts are at this point. DuoLingo has one, which is largely based on like travel stories, and so the sort of setup is that you'll have an English narrator that will introduce the story, and there's like one or more characters that speak Spanish, and they have interactions throughout. And then the English-speaking narrator will jump back in to sort of recap things that had happened or to sort of segue between portions of the Spanish-speaking story. So that's intended to keep you, engaged if you get lost in the middle of the Spanish, right? If you totally lose track of what's happening, the English speaker will come in and kind of catch you back up so that you can move forward. So it's a really great way, I have found, to practice the act of listening to Spanish, which is really, really hard to practice through an app, or basically if you don't have native speakers around that you can have conversations with. So that's been a really great one. Another podcast that I have been using for quite a while, actually, for well before I started this journey and like really took on the act of learning Spanish, is called Coffee Break Spanish or Coffee Break Espanol. That one's more of an educationally focused. So is DuoLingo, but this one's more about like, here's a concept. So maybe we're going to a restaurant and we're going to go through various phrases and words that you will need to know to have the interactions that you might have while you're ordering food, or maybe when you're checking into a hotel or walking around a town that you haven't been to before. And the hosts are really great. They are Scottish, which is really cool to like hear Scottish people speaking Spanish, because normally when you think of Spanish, you think of South America, and they actually speak like Spain, the Spanish version of this language, which is, there are slight differences, and I didn't even know that until I listened to this podcast and started working on learning this language in earnest. So those are some really great resources to use that are, again, free and can really help you build learning this language into your everyday life. Okay, so the third tool that I'm going to use is to read books, and specifically I'm going to start with kids' books. Now, obviously, kids' books are going to have a much more limited vocabulary, and they might even be a little too simplistic for the things that I'm being able to say and learn, at least based on what I'm doing on DuoLingo and with these podcasts. But where I think the key difference is going to come in with this is that in DuoLingo, I'm really able to focus in on like the lesson's topic. So maybe it'll be about fashion or activities or something like that, and I can contextualize the words that they're teaching me and sort of build up this like short-term memory of what it means, but it's hard for me to maybe retain that long term, right? So once I've set that group of lessons aside and I move on for a month, that word may no longer be in my memory banks, and I might not be able to use it effectively. So I think reading books even super simple kids books is going to put me on the spot because I won't have that context. It's not going to necessarily be using the same words and ideas over and over again. It might be just telling a complete start to finish story, and I'll have to be able to process the words that I come across and make sense of them. So I'm hoping that I'll start with kids books and gradually be able to build up in difficulty and maybe even get to like really simple novels by the end of the year. We'll see. It's going to be, I think, quite challenging, especially given the fact that I'm also trying to read 52 books or one book every week, essentially. But I think this will be maybe the most interesting method that I'm going to use for learning Spanish. And then the fourth sort of approach that I'm going to take is to capitalize on whatever opportunities I can get to actually speak with Spanish speakers. So, like I mentioned, I have Spanish speaking coworkers. Instead of having my interactions with them in English, which I know they can speak really well, I already have begun pushing myself to have those conversations in Spanish. Now, obviously this is, if I'm doing it through like our chat service, it's very easy for me because I can take my time, think about what I need to say and like what the proper form of each word is. And so even though I still get some of those wrong, and like my friend Rodrigo will correct me really quickly, it's still a pretty safe approach. What I need to do is actually put myself in situations where I have to speak the language, because there are way less avenues of escape, right? I don't have the opportunity to like duck off to Google if I'm not certain and I need to say something specific that I don't know how to say. If I get myself caught up and I'm fumbling over my words, I have to recover on my own, right? It's on the spot in order to continue that conversation. So this is going to be a really challenging thing. Obviously, I'm still working from home, and I plan to for the foreseeable future. So those interactions are going to have to be almost entirely virtual, which means that I'll have to be intentional about setting them up. But I think it's going to be an extremely valuable way for me to practice the act of speaking Spanish and listening to Spanish. So, like my reading video, I hope that this one gave you a clearer understanding of why I want to learn Spanish and why it's important enough for me that I'm going to prioritize it as a daily habit and fit it into my already extremely busy schedule. If you want to follow along with my progress on DuoLingo, you can follow me on there at @TheAdamNewton. Otherwise, you can keep your eye open for my periodic progress update videos that I'll post to this channel, where I'll show footage of me speaking Spanish like I did at the beginning of this video. I'll also talk about the various books that I tried and maybe failed to read. And I'll even record, at least if I get the opportunity, conversations with me speaking to native Spanish speakers. So you can see what that actually looks like, and hopefully we can see together throughout the year progress in my ability to have conversations with them and see that become more fluid and confident over time. I really appreciate you joining me and checking out my videos. If you have any questions or thoughts, please drop a comment below. Otherwise, if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be continually putting out different content to make sure that you're up to date on how I'm doing with all of the goals that I laid out for myself in 2021. Buenos días, amigos, y hasta pronto.